I think Miller has lost his way a little bit in this book. So far, up to this point, I have enjoyed this series. This is Reckoning, book 4 in the Songs of Chaos. And some of the things that I felt like were problems in this book were starting to show up in book 3, Defiant, but I was willing to overlook some of them because it was a middle book in a 5-book series. Even really experienced authors can still have center books suffer from middle book syndrome, but then when I got to book 4, some of those things that were starting to bother me, instead of getting better, got worse. I think the biggest problem, and this is like kind of an overarching problem and covers some of the other smaller things that were bugging me, is just that the scope was starting to grow too large compared to how it started. I felt like the first book, Ascendant, was enough of an epic fantasy to stand on what it had started building in that first book. All the extra things that started getting added to grow the scope of the world and the political atmosphere, I just have not felt like were necessary, and I feel like have drawn away from the main point of the story, these two characters right here, instead of adding to it in enough of a meaningful way. The feeling that I was getting as I was reading this one was that the story has evolved too much from the Aragon-inspired coming-of-age dragon rider story to this large-scale political fantasy more reminiscent of Game of Thrones. And where Game of Thrones is very definitely adult fantasy, I can feel Miller still trying to keep this as a young adult and keep it, even though there's like some creepy parts, some dark parts, some romance, none of it gets elevated to the point of this wouldn't still be appropriate for young adult, young teens. I think 12-year-olds would still be fine to read this. And so trying to force it, and I say force it because it doesn't feel like a natural progression, it feels like it's trying too hard to become more Game of Thrones-y, but still being in the young adult realm. I lost my train of thought. I can definitely tell that Miller is making an effort to keep it appropriate for those younger ages while still growing it beyond what the first book started as, that simple boy and dragon story. So, the main thing that bugged me about trying to grow the scope so much is adding all the extra point of view characters. There are too many to be able to focus enough on each one to follow along each story enough to care about each one. And sadly, I say sadly, partly because one of my favorite characters so far has been Osric and his companion, who I won't say just in case you haven't read far enough yet. I really enjoyed his introduction as a point of view character in the second book, Unbound. But then by the time we get to this one, Osric's storyline feels completely unrelated. It feels like part of a different series, a whole different book. He feels unconnected and unrelated to the main storyline, which is kind of how some of the other characters felt. Like, I don't think I cared at all about any of the chapters that were point of view chapters of the Paragons. I felt like it was better to have the Paragons be more like these mysteriously strong characters. You don't really know what's going in their minds. They're so far above normal dragon riders that we just can't comprehend how they've gotten to where they are. And having point of view chapters from them does humanize them, which could be seen as a good thing, but I felt like reduced some of the mystery about them, and we didn't need them. Not that the story didn't need the Paragons. I, as a reader, didn't need Paragon chapters. I didn't need to see from their point of view. It just added extra chapters that could have been used for the other main characters that we started with, and that I cared about more anyway. And when you add so many point of view characters, you're left with a couple of options. Miller had the option to just expand the book to be longer. Just go full Sanderson, just add 1,000 more pages. Maybe not 1,000 more. A few hundred pages might have added enough more. Or to keep length down, do what Miller unfortunately did, which is do a lot of telling instead of showing. So just saying, here's what happened, instead of expanding the experience of a character into a scene. There wasn't enough like digging in and spending time with a character and on the dialogue, how the characters feel about each other. There were a lot of places where a lot of the chapter felt like just, I need to get you through this scene so I can get to the next part so the story can move forward. And I didn't enjoy that as much. I would have rather had fewer characters, less stuff happening, and spend more time with each character. And so besides the amount of characters, also trying to raise the scope of what's going on, trying to create this big political fantasy, I was not enjoying that shift as much. A lot of that came in with Talia's point of view chapters and some of with Osric, and I just felt like it wasn't necessary. I would have preferred the focus to stay on, well, okay, maybe this is ironic. I would have preferred the focus to stay on the main threat from the first book, the Scourge, and the big enemy, Thrall, Sovereign, instead of all the like kingdoms wanting to battle each other. I say that's ironic because that's also what Talia wants. She wants all the humans and writers to stop fighting each other and focus on the Scourge threat. That's also what I want as a reader. Can we please go back to that? The bigger picture political machinations just did not draw me in. And I think there were things that Miller would have liked to do that were difficult to keep on the young adult appropriateness level. And if he wants to morph into writing a little more gritty, graphic Game of Thrones style, that he should save it for his next series, not this one. Okay, I don't want it to seem like I'm only complaining. I did feel disappointment in what I got versus what I had wanted or expected, but some good things about this book. If you are a fan of Rake as a character, I would say that this one is the book for you. And there is now a Rake plushie. I don't know exactly where to find it. I don't remember if that was a Kickstarter thing or not. If I find it, I will link it in this video. But for those of you who just love Rake as the character, his chapters may have been some of the best ones and some of the more poignant ones for this part of the story. And also Osric, despite the fact that I felt like Osric's part didn't matter as much. Not that it didn't matter. It wasn't as tightly of a piece of the overall story puzzle as I would have liked. It felt very separate. He is still one of my favorite characters, him and his companion. And his story, from the point where he leaves the other characters to go off and do his own thing, would have made a nice book just on its own, just an Osric book. There's another really interesting character that Ash and Holt meet partway through this book and explains some of the interior artwork that I had been curious about. And I hope in the next book they go on to meet more of those types of characters. This book was definitely on the sad and depressing side, which was not surprising at all. It's exactly what I expected. It actually started out that way more than I thought it would. I thought it would start off a little higher and then get lower and lower and lower towards the end. It started pretty low and pretty rough. And then the ending, a couple of different characters. I am really, really fine with the way this one ended. So even though there was stuff in here that annoyed me, disappointed me, whatever, made me not quite as excited, the way it ends for some of the characters, I think is going to make the next book start way more interesting than this one did. The next book after this is the last one. This is the 4th out of 5. The 5th one is going to have to pick up all the threads from here and get us to the end. One character had an ending that I did not expect. I was surprised by it. Another character had an ending that I was totally not surprised by and felt like it should have been more earned, like the way that character ended just came too quickly. So with the story having grown so much in scope from the first book, I don't know how long the second book will have to be to fit everything that Miller started and got going in the series. And I don't know how long it's going to take him to write it. I think he might get to a point where he just has so much and eventually has to trim it down. And I hope he takes the time to really focus on the important stuff and not fall into the Sanderson trap of just letting it get longer and longer and longer and longer. I will put a link to it and to the artist and to Miller's website. I'll also link my Instagram and my Patreon. Thank you, patrons. I appreciate you guys a lot. And happy reading. Bye.